So my name is Vanessa Fox O'Loughlin, but I write under the pen name Sam Blake, and that's for the very good reason that, as Natalia's just discovered, O'Loughlin's quite a hard name to pronounce, and obviously it's a very long name, and to fit it onto the cover of a book would be a bit of a challenge. So when I started writing, my agent and I sat down and we had a little think about it, and we wanted to work out a name that would work internationally. So now I'm Sam Blake. But I'm here today with both hats on. I'm here as Vanessa and I'm here as Sam Blake. Because I started writing originally in 1999. I don't know how many of you guys maybe have always felt like maybe you wanted to write a book. I think a lot of people do, and I was one of those people. And I really had that always had that feeling since I was quite small. I'd write. I read a huge amount, and I sat down. My husband literally went sailing across the Atlantic in 1999 for 8 weeks, and I was at home on my own. Long dark winter evenings because it was November, and I had an idea for a book, and I sat down and started writing it. And this is back a long time ago, before I could even use a computer. So I was writing it out longhand, and I just started working in a job where I was starting to learn to use a computer. It makes me sound like a total dinosaur, I know, now we're in here in Google of all places. But started writing it longhand, was going into the office the evenings and the weekends to write it up. And it was a book called The Poison Tree, and it featured a detective. I'm quite lucky that my husband, in fact, works for the Gardaí, so I have an access into sort of the police side of things and how that whole world works. And I had this idea, so I literally just started writing. And I obviously thought, because you do when it's your first book, and actually all your books, that it was amazing. Because I think one of the key things about writing is that you need to be optimistic and you need to be positive, and you have to believe in your book, because if you don't believe in your book, who else is going to believe in it? And so obviously thought it was fantastic, finished it and sent it out. Made the first absolute cardinal error when it comes to writing a book. Literally put the last full stop down and then started sending it out. And I sent it everywhere. I sent it to agents and to publishers all over the world. And it was rejected by everybody all over the world. But it didn't really put me off. I kept going. I had an idea for a second book. And so while it was out there being rejected, I kept going and kept writing. Stephen King talks about in his book On Writing about his rejections, because rejection is one of those things that happens in writing. It happens a lot in life, obviously, but it particularly happens in writing. And Stephen King talks about putting all his rejection slips on a nail above his desk. In his book. I didn't keep mine, I didn't collect them. I didn't want to keep that negative energy in one place, so I have them scattered all around the house. And I remember doing a workshop a few years later, and somebody held up a slip from one of the Irish publishing houses. Oh, I've got one of those. It's one of those to add to the collection. But I kept going, kept writing. And I suppose one of the things I knew I needed to do was improve and get better and learn the techniques of fiction writing, which are really, really important. I don't think I really knew that there were techniques when I started writing. I knew we all learn English in school. I did a degree in history. You know, I've written creatively for school essays and my A-levels. I think my A-level essay was about bees. And so, you know, you think you can do it, and you read, obviously, everybody reads. So you keep on going. But I didn't really realise that actually there were things that would actually make the fiction better. And I did a workshop down in Dingle with a lady called Julie Parsons. And that workshop really helped me hugely, because it really proved to me that I could write, and people, you know, my peers and other writers said, oh yeah, actually you do know what you're doing. But it also showed me what I didn't know and how much I needed to improve and how much I needed to learn. And that's really how Inkwell came about, and probably how I got to where I am now. So I set up, I wanted to do workshops, I wanted to do more workshops. The weekend with Julie Parsons, as I say, was down in Dingle, and to get there I had to fly my parents in from the UK. I had 2 small children then. I had to do, you know, frozen stuff in the fridge, I had to do all the notes, the whole lot. So it was a major operation getting away, and that really wasn't an option. And with my husband working shifts, I couldn't get out to an evening class. So I was looking at this problem, you know, I needed to learn how to write, couldn't do any classes, what would I do? I decided I'd start my own. So I got in touch with a friend of mine who's a writer and said, look, I've had this idea, you know, there must be other people out there that want to do one-day intensive fiction writing workshops. And she put me in touch with some authors, and because I was working in event management at the time, I was able to sort of bring all those skills into play, and I set up something called Inkwell, which started off literally as one-day workshops, and my original plan was to do workshops on a Saturday, because that's when you're free, and or most people are free, and all day, and they would just be once a month. And they would be just once a month during the winter, because my kids are off during the summer, and obviously in Ireland we have very long school holidays. So I wanted to make sure these workshops were absolutely completely geared to me. They were geared to me learning how to write better. And it turned out, once I got them up and running and I found a hotel and I got my method sorted out, because I think it's really important when you are learning anything and when you're in that type of environment, that you bond with the person who's speaking. So I always made sure that I had 2 speakers at every workshop, because if you don't bond with one of those people, it can ruin the day for you. And so for me, it's very important to get that mix. So I got my mix working. And it turned out that I wasn't the only person in this situation, that actually an awful lot of other people wanted to do the same thing. And Inkwell became hugely successful. I built a huge network. I had people coming from Switzerland and India. I had people coming from the UK, obviously, because it's nice and close, to come to these workshops. I always use best-selling authors, because I'm a great believer that you don't lick it off a stone. If you get to be bestseller, there's a good reason for it. And so that's really how Inkwell started. And all the while I was doing the workshops, obviously I was learning how to write better myself. I think I've probably sat through more workshops than most people living, because I've been to them all. And I sit in the back taking notes. I kept going, and then I discovered that the Writing.ie domain was available, and I thought, this is great. I have this newsletter that I was sending out to my Inkwell people, my Inkwell writers. And in each newsletter that went out, I'd talk about competitions and festivals and different things that were happening and what was going on in the writing world. And every single time I sent it, literally, I'd press send, somebody would get it, and they'd go, oh, did you know about this one? Did you know about this one? I'd literally get 3 or 4 emails straight back saying, oh, did you know about these? And I didn't. And I thought, well, if I'm the person who's supposed to be trying to coordinate this information, and I don't know what's going on, then how does anybody else out in the country know what's going on? And there was really, at that point, there was no central point for literary information in Ireland, even though we are this amazing literary nation. We've got Man Booker winners, we've got Nobel laureates, we're a fantastic storytelling nation, but there wasn't that central point. So I discovered the Writing.ie domain was available and literally put the Inkwell newsletter into a website and created Writing.ie. It's still going, it's an online magazine. We update daily with information, it's got features in it, it's got competitions, just everything really me as an aspiring writer wanted to learn and wanted to know about has gone into Writing.ie now. And I love meeting writers and them saying, I read Writing.ie, it still amazes me. Amazed me when Donal Ryan told me that he goes there every morning and his wife has to tell him to get off it. That's real reward. So while all these things are going on, one of the things that was happening with Inkwell was that obviously a recession hit Ireland, and literally the bottom fell out of my business overnight. So the workshop side of the business completely collapsed. They were quite high end, they weren't cheap, and this, it was one of those moments, for anybody who's worked in a small business will know that there are moments when, I think in venture capitalism they call it pivoting, but it's that moment when you go, it's not working, we need to rethink this. And so one of the things that happened literally that night when I realised there was no more business, was that I looked at all the things I'd been doing and all the workshops I've been giving and the things that were really working in the company. And one of the things that was working was the scouting side of it. I had built lots of relationships with publishers, lots of relationships with the editors, and all the way along the line I was meeting new authors and they had new manuscripts, and I was really enjoying reading them, but I also discovered them was quite good at spotting the successful ones. And so I was sending them out to publishers and they were getting published, I was sending them out to agents and they were getting picked up. And so basically I formalised that side of the business. I could see that's where we needed to go. So I became a literary scout. I formalised the arrangements with various agents that I work with in the UK. I brought on board a whole load of different authors from different genres who were able to give people readers' reports. One of the things that happened to me through this process was that I'd met an editor and she quite liked the work that the book that I was writing on at the time. I think it was probably book number 3 at that stage. And she'd sent it out to her readers, and those readers had given me feedback on my work, and it was enormously useful. One of the problems with being a writer, it's very easy as a scout to read somebody's work and be able to see exactly what you need to do with it. And as an editor, that, I say easy, it isn't easy, but you can see what needs fixing. With your own work, you can't see it at all. You can't see, it's so bizarre. I think it's because when you write, you have the images in your head. And my job is to take the images from my head and turn them into words on a page so they reform in images in your head. But because I can see the picture, I might have forgotten to tell you that, Fred Bloggs that just walked in the back door has only got one leg. Because I know he's only got one leg, but if I haven't put that on the page, you can't see it. So that, from a writer's perspective, is a tricky one. So what writers need is people to help. It's people to read their work, and so I have a lot of authors now who work for me who do what we call readers' reports. So they will read a finished book and they will look at the plot development, the character development, all of those important things, and help an author move it along and bring it up to the next level. So that's sort of how the publishing consultancy side grew, literally as a result of the bottom falling out of the business, and is now very successful. And really the literary scouting side is what brought me on. So while I'm building the businesses and doing these various bits and pieces, I kept writing. And I think it's absolutely essential for people, or for everybody. I mean, literally the best advice I was ever given was just keep writing. Samuel Beckett said, fail better. Just keep on failing, and I think that's what it's all about. It's improving and improving and improving. Malcolm Gladwell talks about 10,000 hours. That you need to hit that 10,000 hours in order to reach the tipping point, and that is so true, and it's true in writing as much as it is in everything else. So I kept going. I was busy writing away, and one morning I had coffee. I was having coffee with one of the agents I work with in London, and we'd found a book. I'd found a book, sent it to him, and he'd sold it for a lot of money, and he was a very successful agent. And we were sitting down having a little cup of coffee in Covent Garden, and I had a book with me on the counter. It was a book by a friend of mine called Alex Barkley. It was a proof copy of one of her books. And he said, you're reading Alex Barkley? I said, yeah, she's been really influential on my writing, because in fact, this is a trade secret. I've completely stolen Alex Barkley's system of plotting and planning, because she has it worked out beautifully, and I literally have she taught me how to do it, and that's what I use. So he said, you're reading her? And I said, yeah, very influential. And he went, do you write? And somewhere in the midst of things, one of the things I think, certainly for me, and probably for other people that wear lots of different hats in different businesses, is that it's quite difficult for people to understand what you do. So sometimes I'm a literary consultant, sometimes I'm a website managing person, sometimes I'm an author. I'm also the chair of Irish Pen, and I do lots of different things. And this Simon Truan, who's my agent now, hadn't grasped, obviously, the most important bit, which was the writing. So he said to me, what are you working on? And I said, well, I'm working on this book. It's called, it wasn't called The Little Bones then, it's called The Dressmaker. And it's about the bones of a baby turning up in the hem of a wedding dress, and the detective who has to find out what happens. And he went, I'd like to see that. And I had one of those moments of total paralysis, because this is this massive agent in London. He works for a huge company. They're a Hollywood talent agency. And he wants to see my writing, which sounds amazing, brilliant opportunity. But then, as a scout, I'm thinking, if I send him my work and he absolutely hates it, I completely shot myself in the foot. I mean, it's, what happens if it's a disaster? It's like, okay, yes, I can find other people, but I actually can't write myself. But I'm under this illusion that perhaps I can. So I had one of those moments of like, oh my God, literally. But fortunately, we had a happy ending, because he did like it. I read the book right the way through the next day, and I'm getting emails saying, when are you sending it? And eventually did send it, and thank God he did like it. And even better, he was able to sell it, which is also a bonus. So the first book came out in, I've now forgotten the year, 2016, I think, Little Bones, and that is the story of the baby's bones in the hem of a wedding dress. And that story really came about because Stephen King talks in his book on writing, which for anybody who is interested in writing and wants to go that way, it's absolutely the Bible. It is the best book possibly ever written on writing. It's fantastic. And every single published author I know has it on their shelf. So in that book he talks about great story being the collision of two unrelated ideas. How he talks about how, with his books, how two completely separate ideas came together and created a new idea, created a story. And that's really what happened to me with Little Bones. I'd seen an RTE documentary years ago about a serving girl, or a girl who I thought was a serving girl. As it turned out, she worked in a rubber factory when I went to go do the investigation, who had left Ireland in the 1930s, and she'd gone to the UK because she was pregnant and she wanted to hide the pregnancy. And she found herself living in the landlady's house and working in a factory and, you know, unable to cope with the situation. And what happened to her was that she actually had the baby in the middle of the night in a room that she shared with the 12-year-old daughter of her landlady. And obviously, you can imagine the state that she was in. She went to the bathroom to sort herself out, and when she came back, the baby wasn't breathing. So she wrapped the baby up, I now know, in a blue dress, because I went to find all the court details, and she put the baby into a suitcase and put it in under her bed. And went back to Ireland at Christmas, it was just before Christmas, went back to Ireland at Christmas to talk to her priest, and in that time that she was away, the baby's body was discovered. And she was one of the last people to be convicted of infanticide in the UK. And for some reason, this just, I call them light bulb moments. When you see something or you hear something, or you know, you can be at Tesco's looking at somebody's basket or overhear something on the train, and you get this little light bulb moment. You think, that's really interesting. And this thing stuck with me: the baby, the suitcase under the bed. And then I was driving back from the airport. Then 10 years later, I think, possibly, and I was put on the radio, and RT had a documentary about a chap who had written a play called The Country Dressmaker, and his play was one of the plays that saved the Abbey Theatre from total disaster. And he had died. He was a very, very successful playwright, but he died destitute in an apartment, a little room up in Cable Street in Dublin. And what he'd done is he'd left all his plays in a suitcase on his bed. And it was the suitcases that connected in my mind. And this is a few years ago now when I started working on it, before they built the M50, and there were, I think, 32 sets of traffic lights between my house and the airport. So it was a long drive. And on that long drive, by the time I got home, I had been thinking about dresses, been thinking about dressmakers, been thinking about unplanned pregnancies, and I'd come up with the idea that perhaps the girl, Mabel, Agnes Regan, I think her name was, in England, the one thing she wanted was a wedding dress. And so by the time I arrived home, the bones were in the hem of the wedding dress. Now, I didn't know until I was 2/3 of the way through that book how they actually got there. I knew they were in there, I had a really clear impression of it, I had the people starting to sketch out in my head, but I didn't really know how they got there at all. And it wasn't until I started writing a piece of witness testimony in the book that I realised. And I remember emailing Alex Barkley, back to Alex Barkley, I know why the bones were in the wedding dress. And she's like, yes. And it's funny, when you write crime, you have to plot to a certain extent, you have to plan to a certain extent, because of all the things. You know, plots are quite twisted. For any of you who've read No Turning Back, which is the most recent Sam Blake, it's quite a complex plot. There's 2 or 3 different storylines going on in there, and making sure that those things dovetail together and that the right bits are left in the right places is part of that plotting process. And as I say, I've stolen Alex Barkley's system of plotting, so I use this columns across a page and make my notes in it as I go along. But often with writing, and most importantly with writing, is allowing the characters to breathe on the page and allowing them to speak to you. And when they do, when they take over the story and when they start to do things that you don't necessarily expect, that's when story is really, really happening. And that's what happened in Little Bones when I found out about the bones. And in fact, in No Turning Back, the original ending of No Turning Back was totally different. There was everything was different about it. And it didn't feel quite right. I'm a great believer that when you write, you're using your subconscious mind. And I remember Joseph O'Connor at an event I was at was talking about how the characters sort of float in the ether above your head a bit. And as a writer, you're sort of channeling them. It's a very strange process, but it is a bit like that. It's like they're all actually out there, that every character in every book is actually floating around out there somewhere, and they're just waiting to find the person to channel through, to tell their story. And so certainly was finding, when you find Kat Connolly, the detective, she came to me pretty much fully formed, kickboxing detective. And with the various stories, your subconscious mind is the thing that really works. And if you're going wrong, or people talk about writer's block a lot, I really believe that writer's block is your subconscious mind putting the brakes on. And certainly in my second book, which is called In Deep Water, I got stuck writing that about 2/3 of the way through, even though I had my plot worked out, my plans and all the rest of it. And I realised I'd gone wrong. And then when I went back to fix the bit that got where I'd gone wrong, I realised I'd actually gone wrong earlier than that even. So there were 2 twists in it that were wrong. And I think it's understanding that's really important. So for anybody who is writing and does find that they get stuck, there's usually a very good reason for it. As I was coming in here on the dart this morning, I'm just starting a new book, and it's about some terrorist stuff happening in London, and I've just realised that the reason that's not working is something a bit off. I haven't been able to work out what it was, and I think I've got my chemistry wrong. So I was texting my daughter on the train coming in saying, do you know anybody who's good at chemistry? I need to check my chemicals. So that I think that's a really, really important element to understand. But one of the key things with writing, I suppose with anything in life, is to just embrace it, enjoy it, and try certainly for new writers to get to the end of the manuscript. It's really, really important to try and write that first draft right the way through to the end, because very often, and this is sort of I suppose the scout end of things speaking, the first 3 chapters of the manuscript aren't really the first 3 chapters of the book. They're not the first 3 chapters you, the reader, will necessarily see, because it takes you a while to get into the story. And so it can quite often, it can be, especially with a new writer, it can take a while for you to get into the story. And I know certainly Little Bones had a whole long prologue. There's there's 1 paragraph in the start of Little Bones in the first chapter, where an artist called Zoe talks about this piece of work that she's working on and her family and things like that. And that was the prologue. That was 2,500 words. But it was something I needed to write to find my way into the story. But it wasn't something that you necessarily all needed to read. So that has ended up now down as 1 paragraph. But it's just very interesting. One of the absolute crucial things, I suppose, to understand, but also to know as a writer, is that it's the reshaping and the rewriting of a manuscript which is the bit that makes it happen. Once you get the story down, you lay it down, it can be a bit of a muddle, it can be a mess, bits cannot work, but it's really it's that reshaping, it's the editing, it's the rewriting that is absolutely crucial to making it into something that people want to read. So, how are we doing for time, Natalia? We're good. So, I suppose one of the key things as well in terms of crime writing is plot, but at the same time there's character, which is absolutely essential. Unless you have good characters, why would you want to read on? So plot is very, very important. Those 2 unrelated ideas are absolutely essential to try and bring them together. But story is all about character, and you need to be able to empathise and really love that character in order to want to read the story. Because as an author, I'm asking you not only to part with your cash to buy my book, but I'm asking you to part with about sort of 6 or 7 hours of your time, and that's an important contract. So in order to deliver a story and to deliver something that makes you want to keep turning those pages, character is absolutely vital, and understanding your characters and knowing them is really, really important. And characters change, they can develop while you're writing the book. I was blessed with Kat Connolly because she came fully formed, and one of the things about writing a series is that when you go back to the next story, it's a bit like going to meet your friends in the pub, because you know them so well, you know what they're going to say, and sort of the cast, if you like, is already there. So it's a bit like writing a sitcom, isn't it, where you know everybody already, and then you just have to apply the story. So writing a series is fantastic from a writer's point of view, because you can really get into the sort of the plotting end of things. And I'm hoping I get better with each book, and I think No Turning Back is probably one of the best so far. But literally the book I've just written, and hopefully will be coming out towards the end of this year or early next year, is a whole new cast. It's a standalone. And so that meant a whole new set of characters, a whole new story. It's about 2 women who meet on a plane and discover that they have men in their lives who aren't doing everything they should for them, and that they can help each other out a bit to right the wrongs. And that's a whole new set of people, and again, it's developing those people, it's getting to know them, it's knowing their background, their names, where they come from, all of the things that make you, you. And I think for anybody who's writing, I always think one of those, you know, when you meet somebody for the first time and you form, we talk about, psychologists always talk about, but you form an opinion in the first 30 seconds of meeting somebody. What is it that you see? You maybe see their hair, you see what colour jumper they're wearing, you might make assumptions about them from their footwear. If you're a Sherlock Holmes fanatic, he was always looking at people's shoes. And they're the impressions that you form of a character. So it's very important when, certainly for me as a writer, to get a feel for those characters, to know what they look like. I use storyboards, and I go around the internet and I go to magazines and I find pictures of the characters, the people who look like the people who are in my head, and they can come from all sorts of strange places. There's some poor guy from New York who's on Tinder, and I'm not that I use Tinder because obviously I'm happily married, but who I found on a Google search, who is the spit of one of my characters in the next book, so he's up there too. So they can come from anywhere, and it's just like a private reference point for me. And I find that really useful, particularly I suppose because I'm busy, because I'm working and I'm doing the various bits and pieces with the running Inkwell and helping new writers all the time, and moving around a lot. I don't get to write every single day. I mean, writers talk about writing every day, and that's really important, but it's not always feasible. I try and write as often as I can, and try and stay in the story, but I find storyboards are really useful for me because I've got a visual representation of who everybody is, and I stick that. I make up a big A3 one, and it's partly procrastination, because I think as an author, when you start off with a story and you've got this big blank thing in front of you, you spend a lot of time not actually writing anything and just knowing that you should be doing something. But anyway, I spend a lot of time making storyboards, and I put them on my desk, and that means that those characters are calling out to me. So whatever else I'm doing, that those people are there looking at me and literally saying, "Come, tell my story." And I find that a really, really useful part of the process. So will we go to questions?
From a perspective of an unpublished writer where everything looks really, really bad, the first question is, like, how do you actually stop writing? Because every time you finish with your draft, it kind of looks good, but then you read a book, like you read a really good book, and you look at your draft and it's awful. You start rewriting it again, it never stops. You send it to an editor gives you back the comments, you work on them, the draft looks good, but then you look again at it in a month's time, it's awful again. And the second question is, given the first writing, like everyone says, the first writing is awful, it's fine, like you need to improve and work on, but what do you do with your first drafts? Do you just touch them off? Do you is there any reason to self-publish those? Is there any reason to send them to magazines or whatever? Like, what do you do with the first drafts that you know there are, like, in your head, like, those are your children, you've worked on them for such a long time. What do you do with them? Okay. How do you give them up?
I think the first thing is to try and work on your book until you can't see anything else wrong with it. So you get to a point, yes, because that is the whole point. The whole process is that every time you go back in, you see something else you want to fix. So keep working on it, and it might be a long process. I mean, I said I started writing in 1999. It took me 15 years now to actually get a deal. Now it was 5 books later, but it was a long time, and the best advice I was ever given was just keep writing. You only get better, going back to Malcolm Gladwell, you only get better through writing, and you only find your voice through writing. Publishing is always looking for what's called voice, unique voice. We don't need another J.K. Rowling. Do you know what I mean? We don't need another, well, we'd love to have another J.K. Rowling and another Stephen King, but do you know what I mean? We've already got one, so we don't need another one. So finding your voice and your unique voice is really important, and you only do that literally through putting words on the page. So in terms of drafts, the rewriting is vital, that polishing process is vital. I think you have to just keep on going until you cannot see anything else that needs to be changed. When you get to the point where you just don't know what else you can do to it to make it better, and that can be a long, long time. It could be 10 drafts later. I mean, I'm on published book 4 now. I've just finished. I'm on to the next one. I've written probably 4 or 5 complete books before that. So I'm looking at having written 9 books of 100,000 words each, and I still, on the book I've just sent in, it's draft 6. So that drafting process is vital all the way through. So when you get to the point where you can't say any more, you don't know what else to do to it, then the opportunity then is an opportunity to get professional help and see if you can get somebody like an editor to read it and try and improve it. If you get to the point then where you think it's done, it's ready to go, it's at that point then send it out absolutely to publishers, to agents, and see how you get on with it. The thing with self-publishing is wonderful because you can actually find you can get out there. You can get books out there, those drafts. At the end of the day, there's an awful lot of writers in the world, and there are only so many books that can be published. And so there's always going to be more writers than there are people with the capacity to publish. So I think self-publishing is amazing. I know some people who've been incredibly successful at it. The key is that you need to see it as a job and approach it very professionally and understand that the marketing and the editing and the cover needs to be to professional standards because you're competing with, you know, published books out there on the shelf. So it's all about learning that whole process. So self-publishing is great, yes, absolutely. If you send it out and you can't land an agent and you can't land a publishing deal with it necessarily, absolutely self-publish. I self-published one of my books. I wrote a romance, romancy, it wasn't really crime, sort of dark romancy thing, called True Colours. And I'd had another agent long time ago, and she sent it out, and I got what we call rave rejections. Self-published the one, everybody calls them rave rejections, where they love your book, but nobody can find a place for it, or they're not actually quite in a position to buy it, even though they love it. And I felt that was a great book, and I decided I'll get it out there and to see, you know, absolutely self-publish it too. So there's different, these days there are different routes for writers, so you can be a hybrid writer, you can do both. So absolutely, send it out, work on it until you can not see any more things that can be improved, then get professional help, then send it out. If you're still not gelling with that particular book, then absolutely look at self-publishing it. The key with self-publishing is that, again, as I say, you're competing with the published books that are out there, so it needs to be of the highest possible standard that you can get it. And you can't take back negative reviews. You know, if it goes out on Amazon and, you know, you haven't had it proofread and there's masses of typos in it, somebody's going to tell you, and you can't change that. So it's really important to be as professional as you can about it. But it's an exciting world, I think, and as one of the most exciting things about writing is the fact that you can do anything. You don't know where it's going to take you. Publishing is always looking for something original. It's looking for a new voice. It's looking for a new concept. They're looking for authors, debut authors that they can build, that they can put marketing behind, and you know, to break you out. So they're looking for what's called a breakout book, which is a big story if you can do that. And sometimes I think it's important for people to understand that sometimes it isn't your first book that gets published. Quite often your first book is that learning ground. You know, it's this. You know, if we started back to the 10,000 hours, a friend of mine has a great analogy when she talks about playing football and how you guys all learn, well, we all learn football in school, and you know, people go out, you know, kids go out and they kick a ball around on the green outside the house, put the jumpers down for goalposts. But none of those people expect to go and play for AC Milan the next morning, you know. And I think one of the things with writing, certainly one of the things I did with that first book way back when, was that when you write, you think it's going to be the book. It's fantastic and it's amazing, and that you're going to be out there playing for AC Milan. But it's that learning process that takes time. And I think you're doing all the right things. If you're keeping redrafting and you're doing absolutely all the right things, you just have to keep on going. Just keep writing. That's the best advice.
I have a quick question about your writing process. Would you usually write every day, force yourself to write every day, or would you perhaps wait for when you're inspired? And would you also write in the right order? Or would you maybe write a random dialogue, for example? Thank you.
Okay, that's a really good question actually, because I'm a really organised person and I need to write in a linear fashion, so I have to start at the beginning of the book and end at the end. Other friends of mine don't write that at all. I don't know how they do it, but they obviously, their minds work in a completely different way, and they would write like a scene, like if they suddenly want to write a fight scene, they'd write that from the end and then something else from the beginning, and then they put it all together. I use a tool called Scrivener, and quite a lot of authors use Scrivener to collect the bits together. I actually just use it for my research so that I can put stuff into files and then find them again. So if you do write in that out of order way, then that can be a really useful tool. Personally, I write in a very linear fashion, and I do try and write every day, but it doesn't always happen. I think you think about your book all the time when you're working on it. So like I was saying, coming out in the Dart, I wasn't actually writing, but I was plotting in my head, I was thinking, trying to work out where I was going with the story. And I think as a writer, it's always there with you, and it needs to be always there with you. I remember somebody emailed me once, and long time ago, and she said, oh yeah, I'm going on holiday, so I'm going to take, I won't be taking the book, I won't be able to work on that because I'm going on holiday. And I thought, well, if you're a writer, you write all the time. I drive my family mad because I write on holiday, and it's my thing. It's the thing I love to do most. And so I sit there, I get up at 6 o'clock in the morning when I'm on holiday, and that to me, it's a couple of hours and typing away is the thing to do. So I try and write every day. If I'm not writing every day, I am thinking about it. When you're under deadline, it's different. I think one of the crucial things is that when you don't have a contract, when you're an unpublished writer, as I was, you have the luxury of time. And it's really difficult to recognise that because you're desperate to get published and you're desperate to get the deal. But you have the absolute luxury of time. You can spend as long as it takes to make that book the best that it can be. And if it's not that book, it might be the next book or the next book or the next book. But that you've got all the time in the world to do that. When you get under contract, you suddenly get deadlines, and you suddenly find that actually you've written book 1 because that was fine, that you had that written, and then all of a sudden you've got to write book 2, and then you've got to come up with an idea for book 3, and then you might be launching. What happened to me was I was launching book 2 and trying to finish book 3 at the same time, and suddenly you might have to I had to write 30,000 words in 9 days once to get book 3 finished, which is partly why the end had to be completely rewritten. But it's a whole different world. So I think enjoy that time, and so when I'm under contract, when you're under deadline, it's much more every day. It's like, this is the thing I've got to do, and it helps if you're in the zone and you can stay in it much more than trying to write bits and pieces. But you do train yourself. I think you train yourself to write to suit your lifestyle. So I wrote at least 2,000 words of one of the books on the plane to Frankfurt Book Fair. It leaves here at 7 o'clock in the morning, so it was an early start. And I've written on trains, I write in cafes, I write everywhere, and noise doesn't bother me. One of the things I do is I tend to have a soundtrack for each book. So Kat Connolly is obviously 24, a lot younger than me. She listens to pop music. She's a 24-year-old. So I have whatever's in the charts is her soundtrack at the time. So I would make a soundtrack for each book, and I plug my earphones in and stick them in, and that helps drown out everything else that's going on in my head as well as the noise around me, so that it means I can really focus on the book. And when I hear the sound, then I know I'm in the zone for writing. This book is about a woman who was an ex-ballerina, so it's the Mars Symphony, and I'm using that for this one, for the soundtrack for this one. The next book, I don't know what that soundtrack's going to be. I'm only just starting it, so we'll wait and see. But I find that enormously useful because it helps block out the sound wherever you are, but also what's going on in your head. So I think one of the things about writing is that it's really worth listening to writers, lots of different writers, because we all do the same thing, and we all use bits of the same technique, but we all have developed them in our own way, and there's no right and wrong way to write. So some people write bits all over the place, some people write organically and they don't plot and plan at all. A friend of mine, Monica McInerney, remember her telling me she wrote 40,000 words of a book, and in totally the wrong direction. It was a complete, all wrong. She had to literally delete 40,000, that's half a book, right? But in that 40,000 words, there were a couple of paragraphs which were absolutely crucial to the progression of the plot that she wouldn't have found if she hadn't written the 40,000 words. So nothing is ever wasted in writing. It might be that you write a book and it never sees the light of day, but it's not wasted because you've used that time and your creative mind's been working on it. It's really, really, really vital. So technique, listen to writers, find out how everybody else does it, find out what works for you, and then you can draw in and devise your own way of doing things that works with your lifestyle. Some people have little kids and they can't, they can only write. I used to only write during my daughter's nap time, and my daughter would only sleep for 20 minutes at a time. So I think I learned quite early on to 20 minutes. And when you've only got 20 minutes, it's amazing what you can do. You block everything else out. So everybody's different, but find the way that works for you.
You mentioned the luxury of time. I've been sitting on a manuscript for about 13 years. So what's your advice for someone who just wants to get the thing out there but doesn't want to be dealing with loads and loads of details like cover design, ISBN, this thing, that thing, some other detail? As most Googlers just want to get a thing out there, they're not really interested in making a whole bunch of cash out of it.
Okay.
They got a day job.
But you want people to read it?
Yeah.
Okay, so if you want people to read it, then you can. There are lots of companies who do all that for you, so you don't have to worry about any of it. You just go to one of them, and they're professional. I can give you the names. There's a couple, two here in Ireland are very good. They come back from trade backgrounds and they understand the business. But things like, getting a good cover is crucial, because that's how a reader recognises a book. You know yourself when you go into a bookshop, you pick the book up, depending what the cover looks like, turn it over, read the back. Open it, read those first few paragraphs. So those things are really, really, really important. If you're at that point where you don't want to be bothered with the doings of the makings, but you've already done your bit of the makings, then I think I would probably just get one of the companies to come who do that professionally to do it, and they'll do it properly for you, and they'll get you a great cover. They'll help you with the blurb, and then you can still self-publish, so you're still doing it yourself, but do send it out to the trade first. Do get an editor to have a look at it, or get a reader's report done on it, so you know that what you've got there is the right bit, and do think about another story too. I suppose that's really important, is that if you are, everybody's different. I mean, maybe you only want to write one book, and that's fantastic because you have, obviously, and actually getting to the end is a massive achievement, because there are lots of people who want to write books and not very many people actually finish them. But if you are writing and you finish one book, think about the second one, because if you do get a contract, it won't be for one book, it'll be for a minimum of 2. And you need to have that next idea ready to go. It'll make a huge difference. It'll help you with this awful contract deadline log. So do keep writing. But no, absolutely, people can help you out and get it out there for you. It's hard when you spend a lot of time working on things. But do start thinking. If you enjoyed that process, start thinking about the next one. Move on.
You usually give really good advices to those who are in the beginning of the process, and I really like the idea about the storyboard. So how it usually works? For example, it's like detectives in crime movies do this by thinking, searching, putting together all the pieces. For writing, how you would recommend to use the storyboard?
Okay, well I do. So I get the pictures of the people, and then the locations. I spend a lot of time looking. Because I'm a detail person. I like to be in control of everything, and I'm really into the whole getting everything right. So I would go to find the locations. I try and visit the locations if I'm writing about them. I try and use places I've been. So if it's the inside of somebody's apartment, I've been to the apartment, but I do go onto these property websites and I get people's floor plans and the interior shots of different people's houses, and I put those onto my storyboard. So it just means then if I'm writing about somebody going into the living room, I don't forget that actually what they can see out the window, or I don't forget that the kitchen's off this particular room as opposed to off a different one. In theory, when you get to the point where you have a copy editor looking at your book in that sort of final editorial process, they'll notice, like if 8 people went into the lift and only 4 people came out, but or somebody's pregnant for 14 months, I think one of my friends managed. Those type of details I think are great for a storyboard, because particularly locations, because then you can see where your people are. I've got one character who I think might live on a houseboat, and so because we're very close to Grand Canal Dock, I spent a lot of time walking around Grand Canal Dock, getting pictures of houseboats, trying to find the right layout for the houseboat for the story that I wanted, and I've got a whole houseboat layout on and pictures of Grand Canal and different places where they might have stayed on my storyboard. Yeah, so I just find them really useful. I mean, in film, obviously people plot out the actual story on storyboards, and they use them for, in animation and stuff, you use them to actually tell the story, but I just tend to have a static one which has like locations, and sometimes the dressmaker had bits of lace on it from a wedding dress, and it had a deck of cards I think I had stuck on it, all sorts of bits that were just, I felt, were going to go into the story. It's sort of pooling the creative place. Yeah, so but I found it really useful.
Thank you very much. I think that's all for today, and I really appreciate it. Was, I think, a very inspiring story, and it's always good when you can talk to a person who has already a success career and who can also share some advices and just give some tips and tricks and all those small exercises that are quite useful for many people. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me.